Hey there. Before we jump into today's episode, we want to thank you for tuning into Unapologetically First Gen. This is the podcast where two sisters share what it's like to grow up as first-generation immigrants, everything from the hilarious moments to the heartfelt ones. Each week, we'll bring you personal stories, honest conversations, and amazing guest interviews that celebrate the first-gen experience. So if you love laughing, learning, and feeling connected, you're in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with your friends. It really helps us grow. If you want to contribute to episode topics and get exclusive content, join our Patreon linked in the show notes.
Hello, I'm Stacy, the younger sister. I'm a former teacher turned copywriter, cat mom, and slightly obsessed with romantic books.
And I'm Leslie, the older one, operations expert, home baker, mom to 2 kids and a bunny.
Welcome to this episode. We are going to be talking about going to college. Woohoo! So going to college and general schooling in our lives, I would say education was super highly valued, especially from our mom, who would take us on library trips every week and bring home a lot of books. She would volunteer in the classroom, stuff like that. We were also first-gen college students. When you look at our whole family, there's only a handful of us who actually have gone to college, which is totally okay. College is not the right move for everybody, despite what the education system tells you. I think it had a big impact on our lives.
I agree. I have extremely fond memories of going to the library with mom, carrying my cloth bag of books home.
Before cloth bags were cool.
Before cloth bags were cool, we were making cloth bags happen.
And something that our listeners might not know is that we both actually went to a public school that had Portuguese education. And so our experiences were a little bit different because of the age gap and the way that the program changed over time. So I'll let you go first if you want to talk about what was elementary school like, if you have any memories of it.
Yeah, I do. So one thing that's important is I didn't speak English until I went to school. Everybody around me spoke Portuguese. The community spoke Portuguese. There was no need for me to learn English. When I started school, I went into a Portuguese program, and the idea was to essentially introduce us to English. So kindergarten through 2nd grade, I was in this program, and then in 3rd grade, I got put in English class, but with a Portuguese teacher, which helped. And in 4th grade, it was an American teacher, English speaking all the way. I remember that experience being a little bit jarring for me. I didn't love it. I really had wanted to stay in the Portuguese program, and I didn't understand why I couldn't be, because I was just way more comfortable there as opposed to mixed in with everybody else. And the thing is, so were all of my school friends. They were all there. They were all in the same class. So it was jarring, I think, to suddenly not have a classroom, I'm going to say classroom leader, who is Portuguese, who could help you when you didn't know what a word meant, or, hold your hand through something, or even understand the cultural differences or implications of some things. I think that was a little weird.
You're saying this, and I'm thinking about all the students that I had who they were immigrants, and they're coming into this country not speaking any English, and all of a sudden they're now immersed in this English, everything is English, and they have to figure it out. And how scary that is when you're 8, 9 years old.
Yeah, it was similar, but I guess it was less jarring for me than it would be for them, because they're just getting drafted into a whole country and culture that's completely different than their own, whereas I got to slowly walk in through the shallow end to experience American culture. And I really missed the Portuguese teachers and stuff like that. And even to this day, I think most fondly of those teachers, those first few years of teachers who, maybe everybody does think that way. I think it's funny to note that when you started teaching, your classroom assistant was our classroom assistant when we were in kindergarten.
Yep, she was there the whole time.
You refer to her by her first name, and I'm like, I can't do that.
It's because I worked with her for a few years, so I kind of had a shift between calling her like Miss to like her name.
Her first name, but we went there around Christmas time, maybe?
Yeah, so we still see her. We're still in touch. I probably see her once a year.
Yeah, and when you brought my kids, I wanted her to meet them. She gave them a little like VTech computer thing. And just last week I was telling Mom, I was like, oh my God, that little computer thing, I know I was hesitant to bring it. She probably just wanted to get it out of her house because it's probably driving her crazy. But it's wildly popular with my kids. They love it. And I was telling Mom, I was like, oh, do you remember how Miss So-and-so gave us a little computer? And Mom was like, oh, you mean first name? And I was like, no, that's not at all who I mean.
Well, it's funny because I think like, now that we're talking about this, it really was like the teachers were such a big part of the community, which I don't necessarily feel like is true all the time anymore. My 5th grade teacher was another person she was my colleague when I went back and worked at the school. And when I went to Portugal this year, I actually met up with her and had lunch with her and we caught up. She's in her 70s now, but it's like all of these people that were part of my childhood are still valued members of my community.
Yeah, you're right. Now that you say it, it's true. You would see the principal of the school, our teachers, we would see them at community events. We would see them at church. We would see them at anything. And they were kind of friends with Mom. Mom came in and she did field trips and stuff like that. And she was able to, because we were in this program where these teachers spoke the same language that she did. But all of that kind of ended for me when I went into the 4th grade and I had an American teacher, and then I didn't have that connection back to the community.
Yeah. And so to give people some context from like a program perspective, when Lesley was in this Portuguese program, it was a transitional bilingual program. Basically, what that means is the goal of the program was to help people transition to be fully fluent in English. And so it really wasn't about preserving the language. It was really about providing people support so that they could succeed in speaking English, in reading and writing in English. Versus when I went through the program, it was then 8 years later, the focus of the program had changed. When I started the program, the focus had changed. It actually became a dual immersion program. And so the goal of a dual immersion program is to actually uphold both languages. And so because of that, I was able to go through up until 8th grade. The structure changed for middle school. Like, I remember elementary school was very much like you were with your Portuguese teacher. Sometimes you alternated weeks. Sometimes it was like half day, where you spent half the day with your Portuguese teacher, half the day with your English teacher. But then in middle school, it was like blocks. And so I remember we had it was like English and social studies and then math or whatever, however they split it up. I remember the only times that we interacted with the other kids was when like special programming came in and they were like, well, we can't like forget about the immigrant kids. And I remember one of those being Know Your Body and how uncomfortable I felt, because it was like these weren't kids that I knew. We'd see them out at recess, and I was friends with some of them from going to after school programs, but it was really awkward because it was like, I don't really know you. And we're talking about these really sensitive subjects that weren't commonplace to talk about back then in the 90s. So I just remember that part of my experience. I was also fortunate enough that I was able to take Portuguese in high school, which I think was really helpful for my reading comprehension and my ability to write.
Also took Portuguese in high school, and
yeah, we had the same teacher.
We did, and I really enjoyed that experience. I'm glad that I did it. I kind of wish I could take another Portuguese class now just to bring up the skills a little bit more. Although maybe I should just move to Portugal. Do you want to talk about 8th grade?
Sure.
So 8th grade, where we went to school, is part of elementary school. We don't have a separate middle school here. When I was in 8th grade, there was this really important experience where you had to pick which quote unquote house you wanted to attend in high school. And for some background here, there's one high school in our town and it's massive and if you're going to a public high school, that's where you're going. But it was split into houses. And though they were not named this, they were absolutely segregated. So there was a house where all the immigrant kids went. There was a house where all the Black kids went. Offensively, there was a separate house where all the smart kids went, where neither immigrants nor the Black kids. And I'm pretty sure this is exactly why the system changed. There was a house that was like the LGBTQ and the theater kids were in that house. So you had to pick the house. And I remember that I, not having anybody who had gone to high school that I could ask these questions to, didn't know what house to sign up for. But there were a lot of conversations about how you wanted to go into high school. Like, did you want to be seen as the immigrant kid, or like, here was your chance to show up as an American? Like, so don't sign up for the house where all the immigrants go if you don't want to be seen as the immigrant. And there were conversations about this sort of in recess and kind of whispered conversations in the hallway. And it was weird to have to make this decision that affected the next 4 years without actually having a lot of information. But by the time you got to 8th grade, it was different.
Yeah, so we did not choose a house. They actually sorted us, I think, to try to be more equitable.
Yes, it did get rid of the segregation issue that we were having.
Interestingly enough, if you look at the demographics, there's actually at least one school. It's still pretty segregated here. I think it's kind of gone backwards in a lot of ways, but that's a side point. I could do a whole nother podcast on the status of education, not just an episode, an entire podcast. They automatically sorted you, but you did choose classes. And I have this memory of choosing classes. And I don't remember if like a guidance counselor from high school came in to like talk about it. I do remember whoever it was saying that we should only pick one honors class because otherwise it would be too hard. And this was something that I didn't realize until maybe like, I think it was freshman year, like the end of freshman year. I was like in this history class that was so boring. There was like such behavioral issues, and it was because I didn't choose like the honors class. And I remember it was a grad student that was teaching that class, and he was like, you really need to be in all honors classes. Like, you shouldn't have never been in this class. But it's like, I know that the classroom that I was in, they were telling kids not to be in honors classes because they're too hard. But I also know that like other schools with wealthy white parents were being told to sign up for only honors classes. And I do think that impacted which colleges I was able to get into later.
Was told not to take any honors classes, which is insane because I spent, for 6th and 7th grade, I left our elementary school and went to like gifted kids program. And then I came back for 8th grade because you had started kindergarten. It made it a little bit easier for everybody. And I have a lot to say about the gifted kids program in general. But knowing that like the regular elementary school curriculum that they were teaching us was far too easy for me, and still not being told that honor classes was an option for me was such a disservice to young me. And to anybody else who was also in that. I wasn't the only kid that got to go to this program, but I'm sure that the kids who stayed in the program were all in AP class. I know they were. Actually, I know they were. I'm like friends with them now. I know they were, but I wasn't, because I happened to like be in a different school at the time that we were completing these forms to submit to the high school.
I remember, even though the houses that we were put into, our homerooms, were very diverse, the classes were not, because they would be, you walk into an AP class, it's all white kids and me in the back. But then you walk into like CP English, which I think they have gotten rid of I think that now, if I'm not wrong, if anybody is a teacher in this town, you could correct me, all of the classes are honors classes. That is the only option, because they're just trying to elevate the standards. But it was very much like you walk in and you're in a room full of Black kids and immigrant kids, versus walking into the honors class, it was very much white. And so even though they did these things to like unsegregate the school was still very segregated in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's like they did these things to segregate the umbrellas we were put under, but like it was for show.
Yeah.
My 4 years in high school, we went through 3 principals.
Yeah, you guys were not in a good place.
We were not in a good place.
You guys were like at risk of losing your accreditation when you
We
were
were.
there.
Yeah, we were. It was pretty bad. And the thing is, when I talked to my friends who came from these wealthier neighborhoods, they did not have the same experience. When I'm saying our school was so bad at some point, they're like, yeah, I guess that's true, but that's not the experience I had. I'm like, well, of course. I remember, like, I didn't go, I think it was senior year. I didn't attend any class during the lunch block so that I could go to both lunches. That's crazy. Having like entire blocks of time where I had what was essentially study hall, but it wasn't called that because you weren't allowed to have study hall. They like had gotten rid of study hall. So I was supposed to sit in the office for like 2 hours at a time because they didn't have classes to put me in.
That's wild.
Well, I just ended up leaving early.
I did that too, especially junior and senior year when I started taking AP classes. After the exams, there was nothing to do. So I had my calculus teacher, he would just be like, hey, just check in, let me know that you're here and in school that day, and then you can do whatever you want. Go to the library. And I would just go to Harvard Square.
Right. That's where we all went. I do wonder if that's like still an experience that people have in that high school.
Think
because Harvard Square is so different now.
I also think the school is very different now. I think that, they did a lot of work in the district to make this one of the best schools in the country. And I think that, I don't know, I would be curious. I should reach out to some of the teachers that I know who still work there.
Are kids still hanging out in Harvard Square
Yeah.
Do they still sneak out the smoking door?
Let's shift into college. Otherwise, we can talk about high school all day. I think that one of the big reasons that I did go to college and went away for college was because I started taking those AP classes and started being in those crowds with people. It was the people who were applying to 20 different colleges because they had to get into the best possible college. Which, I was like, I can't pay for 20 different college applications. I was like, let me pick 5 and pay for this with my own money that I made from my after-school job. But I do think that being in the same room as all the wealthy white people, it gave me a different view of what my opportunities could be.
Right. I had a very different experience than you.
Yes, I know.
I've alluded to this. I'm pretty sure I've told this story, but the story upsets me so much that I'm going to tell the story again, just for anyone who hasn't listened previously. Here's a nice intro to me being angry about my high school experience. Everyone was required to meet with their guidance counselor about what you're doing after high school. I went to my required meeting and was like, I don't know what I want to do after college. I don't know what I want to study. I don't know what I'm good at. I don't know what college I want to go to. I don't know how to apply. I don't know how I would pay for it. And my guidance counselor said, well, college isn't for everybody, and handed me a book that was like
a yellow book.
For the people who are older, it was basically like the yellow pages, but of colleges, and sat me outside of her office to flip through. And she was like, oh, let me know if any of these schools look interesting. That was my meeting about me going to college. It wasn't like, so you're interested in going, let's talk about it. Let's talk about scholarships. Let's talk about financial aid. None of that. I didn't have any of those conversations. So I just assumed that college wasn't for me because I didn't know what I wanted. I thought college was you knew what you wanted to study and that's what you were going to go for. I thought college was you had a plan for paying for it. I didn't have anybody to ask these questions to because I didn't know anybody who had gone to college. And my guidance counselor was extremely unhelpful in supporting that. There was this career center at school. And I remember I did go there and I was like, well, I don't know what I want to do. And they made me take this personality test.
I took that.
And it was you got a printout at the end and it was 27 pages of 15 different career paths you could take. But no way, there was no one there to be let's talk about this. It was just someone just handed me this and was like, you would be good at any of these. And I was like, what does all this mean? Again, just like not having this support system was so easy to fall through the cracks. And then kind of on top of that, Mom and Dad did not want me to go away for college. They were very, very against that idea. They were really uncomfortable with the idea of me leaving and living somewhere else for college. And they straight out were like, we will not pay for college if you're moving.
They said that to me too. And I was like, fine, don't.
To be fair, I feel like I paved the way.
You did.
So I think that's why you were able to do that. So the end result was I didn't go to college right away. I ended up getting married. I was 18 years old when I got married. I do not recommend getting married that young. Spoiler alert, I got divorced at
It's
like
so funny
22.
because pretty much everybody forgets that you were married a first time.
Also, I'm pretty sure that like when my in-laws hear this, it's going to be the first time they know that that this is not my first marriage. So, but what ended up after I was married and I was like working a retail job. No, I was working 2 retail jobs and I was like, I gotta do something different. And I did apply to go to school and I ended up going to college, but I was, then my marriage fell apart. I got divorced. I ended up having to like work full time, but I still didn't want to give up on my degree. So it was working full time, going to school part time most of the time. A few semesters I was able to do a full course load. Most semesters I only did part time. It took me 7 years to get my undergraduate degree. And then it took 4 years to get my master's degree.
You did it!
I did it. And like the whole time I remember just, and I've said this before, but I remember being like, okay, grandma learned to read and she was a grandmother.
When she was 53, you can do this.
I can do this. Like, and it was just so many sleepless nights. I remember just like running into friends and them being like, wow, you really like kind of seem like you're staring off into space. And it's like, because I work a full-time job and I'm taking 3 classes, so tired. And I was volunteering, doing community work. I have no idea how I had that. I had that level of energy because I was like in my 20s.
I was going to say, I had a very similar, I was talking to my husband about this. Even though I was in school full-time, I worked part-time and I volunteered and I was every single semester taking the maximum amount of credits. And I have the same thoughts, like, how did I do that and not go crazy and not completely burn myself out? But it's like, I just liked being busy. It was the first time that I had a lot of freedom to kind of do whatever I wanted. And so I like went out and did all of the things that I wanted.
Right. Yes, that's the key. Is like you do everything at the same time. And I constantly fall into that trap of overextending myself. And I'm like consistent with over scheduling myself, but you figure it out.
You figure it out and you learn like when you need to dial back and what's going to make the most sense.
Yeah. Another thing that was different between you and I think, because when I went to school, so few members of our family had also gone to school, that there was a little bit of a stigma around it. And maybe because I was already married, the stigma was worse. It was sort of like, well, you already have a husband and you finished high school, like you have a job. Why do you need to go to college? It almost felt like people assumed I thought I was better than the community because I was trying to go to college and better myself. I don't think there's a stigma around it now, currently. Did you feel that stigma at all?
No, not really.
But I did. There was a lot of like, well, what's the point? Like, you're already married. Why do you need to go to college? You already have a job. Why do you need to go to college? And it's like, I don't want to work retail. I do not like people enough.
But I also think when I was applying to college, at that point, you had already graduated undergrad.
Yeah.
And so I think that opened up opportunities for you. I think that by the time I left, you were like more established professionally. And so I think that took away from the stigma too, because it's like you had gone to college, another 2 or 3 of our cousins had gone to college. And so now you're seeing that college actually did open up opportunities for people and actually is paving the way for a better life. And so maybe it's not such a bad thing that people want to go to college.
Also, at that point, I was divorced, so.
That's true.
I was like, good thing you went to college. You don't have a husband to fall back on.
But yeah, I think it's funny because I went to college and then I did a year of AmeriCorps. And then I did a second year of AmeriCorps where I was able to get my master's in education, taught for a few years, and then went back and got my educational leadership degree. So I really love school. I think I'm done, though. I think I'm done. Are you done? Because every once in a while, I'll be like, do I want to get my PhD? Do I want to like write a book and do my PhD? Like, I could do it. I could, but do I want that?
I think you could write a book. I think you should write a book. What I think is not even a degree, but I'm like, I could just audit a class, like, for fun. So I'm actually about to start a certification program for my business. And I already have the next certification lined up for when this one's done.
You know, what's funny is one of the things when I left teaching, I was like, I really want to make sure that I am supported through my business and that I have a plan to be learning and pushing myself because I don't do well when I feel like things are easy. It's a horrible problem to have. This is the first time in my business right now that I actually don't have a coach that I'm paying for or a mentor. And I do have somebody that I think I want to hire later on, but I also am kind of taking this time to take stock and be like, you know what? You don't have to be constantly learning. You can also just rest. So we'll see how this goes. I'm hoping for 6 months of no learning.
Pick it up in the fall with all the other students.
Exactly.
Should take some time off. But you're also in a constant teaching position.
I am. I can't get rid of that. Any final thoughts on going to college, your school journey, anything else?
Personally, no, but I have talked to other people who did not have the same immigrant experience as us, who also talked about being the first ones in their family to go to college and the stigma around it. So our experiences are absolutely not kind of just
representative of the whole immigrant community.
No, it's a lot of people. I think anybody who came from any poor area is going to say, yeah, I had the same exact experience. No one believed in me. I had to really push myself to get where I am. And you see it, we've both worked with kids, so we could really see it just being like, wow, you're really good at science. Like, I hope you grew up to be a doctor, and then being like, I could be a doctor? And you're like, yeah, you could be a doctor. Just this like idea, kids hear it so young, what they can and can't do. You know, our experience isn't just our experience. Our experience is for a lot of people that are coming from groups outside of a wealthy white America.
Yes. And if you are somebody who's in the immigrant community and you had a different experience and want to share your story, reach out to us. The links are in the show notes, but I would love to hear from somebody who like chose not to go to college, who went like the technical school route, who started businesses early in their careers. Whatever it is that your story is, reach out to us. We are going to start opening this up to guests soon. So if you are interested in that, let us know. I'd love to hear any more school/college/career journeys. All right. And I think we can wrap this up. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time. If this episode resonated with you or you have your own first gen stories to share, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us on Stacy Braga Copy or Streamline with Lesley on both Threads and Instagram, linked in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share the podcast with someone who'd love it. Until next time, keep embracing your roots and making your own path.